Welcome children. Today we will start with the third chapter of Economics for Standard 9, that is Poverty as a Challenge. In this chapter we will deal with one of the most difficult challenges that were faced by independent India, and that challenge was poverty. We talk about poor people or poverty, and we only tend to think about beggars on the road. However, all people who are poor are not beggars. They could be landless laborers in villages or people living in crowded jhuggies in cities. They could be daily wage workers at construction site or child workers in the dhabas. Now, if I compare myself with Mukesh Ambani, yes, I'm also very, very poor. Now the question arises, who is poor? And who will decide who is poor? How will we rate poverty? Now the government of India has defined poverty as a situation in which a person is not able to get his minimum basic necessities of life. And what are the basic necessities of life? Food, clothing and shelter. So here is a definition for poverty is defined as a lack of common things like food, clothing, shelter, safe drinking water, medical care and education, which determines the quality of life. Poverty is a worldwide problem. However, this problem is more in India. Almost 26% of our population lives in poverty. That is around 26 crore people in India live in poverty. Now, however, the latest report suggests that India is no longer the poorest country. Nigeria overtook our country with the largest number of poor people. Not all people living in cities are rich, and not all people living in villages are poor. Poverty exists even in urban and rural areas. Now let us look into the story of two people, one who lives in the urban area and the other who lives in the rural area. Now let us do a case study of an urban area. Ram Saran is a daily wage laborer in a flour mill near Ranchi in Jharkhand. He earns around 1500 per month when employed. He supports his family of 6 persons besides sending some money to his elderly parents. His wife and son also work, but none of his 4 children can attend school. The family lives in a one-room rented house on the outer areas of the city. The children are undernourished, have very few clothes or footwear, and have no access to health care. Now let us look into another case study of the rural area. It is the story of Lakha Singh. Lakha Singh is a landless laborer in a small village near Meerut in Uttar Pradesh. By doing odd jobs for farmers, he earns rupees 50 per day. Sometimes he gets some food grains or other items instead of cash. He is not literate and his family of 8 people lives in a kacha hut near the edge of the village. They have no access to health care and cannot afford new clothes or even soap or oil. So children, after the case study of Ram Saran and Lakhan Singh, we see that there are 2 types of poverty in our country: urban poverty and rural poverty. In the urban poverty, we see the daily wage earners and the rickshaw pullers. In the rural poverty, we see landless farmers. How do we know if a person is poor? Now to know this, we came up with the concept of poverty line. Now we measure the poverty line based on income and consumption levels. Now the government has decided a minimum level of income and consumption. Now whoever consumes below this minimum level or whose income is below this minimum level is considered to be poor. So you see children, this minimum level is our poverty line. Now to describe the poverty line, we can say it is an imaginary line used by any country to determine its poverty, and it varies from place to place, time to time, and country to country. Let us take an example of USA. Children, in USA, a car is a necessity. So if anyone does not possess a car, then he is considered poor. In India, our poverty line is at a very low level and car is still a luxury for us. So children, if we compare USA and India, we have different standards for considering who is poor and who is not. In India, poverty line is measured by the National Sample Survey Office, NSSO. The NSSO looks at the minimum subsistence level, that is, it sees to what are the basic things that are required by anyone for meeting his or her daily needs. To determine the poverty line, the NSSO takes into consideration the minimum food requirement, the clothes, the footwear, fuel, light, education, and medical requirement by a person. So let us look into the first thing, that is the minimum food requirement. How do we decide what is the minimum food requirement? Yes, it depends on the calorie requirement by a person. Now what is calorie requirement? Yes, calorie requirement is the amount of calories your body requires so that you can live a normal everyday life. Now this calorie depends on our age, on our gender, and the type of work we do. Now depending on these factors, which factors? The age, the gender, and the type of work, we have measured the average calorie requirement for the urban as well as the rural areas. In the urban areas, a person needs to consume at least 2100 calories per day, whereas in the rural areas, a person needs to consume at least 2400 calories per day. Now children, you must be wondering, why is the average calorie requirement in rural areas higher? Yes, it is because the rural area people have to do more work as compared to the urban areas. So they require more calories. Now children, when we convert this minimum subsistence, what is the minimum subsistence? That means the basic things that are required by a person to live properly. That means he needs clothing, he needs footwear, he needs lighting, he needs housing, he needs his food, health care. And when all these basic necessities, when we convert them into rupees, okay, we change them into rupees, convert them into rupees, then we will know the minimum money required by a person to live properly in an urban and rural areas. The cost of each item in the minimum requirement, like food, clothing, footwear, power, shelter, healthcare, all these things are just added up. Like here I have taken for food, cost is maybe 300, for clothing it is 50, footwear it is 50, for education it is 100, power it is 100, then for shelter it is 300, maybe for healthcare it is 100. If we add up all these into rupees, we get 1000 rupees. That means 1000 rupees is the minimum income required for a person. So based on this calculation, the minimum required in urban areas for minimum subsistence is 1000 rupees per person per month, and whereas in rural areas we have seen it is 816 per person per month. Now the poverty line income has been fixed in the rural areas as rupees 816, whereas in the urban areas it is rupees 1000. Now why is there a difference? Because things are much cheaper in the rural areas than they are in the urban areas, and you can see the difference in the calories. The rural people require more calories because they do more physical labor. Children, note that the poverty line income is fixed on a per person basis. Thus, to find the poverty line for a family, this monthly income needs to be multiplied by the number of family members. Like in this case, we see there are 5 members in this family. So per person in a rural area is 816. So if we multiply it by 5 times, we get 4080. So the minimum poverty line income for a rural area is 4080 rupees. So if we take a family of 5 in an urban area, the family will need rupees 5000 per month, whereas in a rural area a family of 5 will require 4080 rupees to survive. This is the minimum subsistence level. I know this amount is too less, but you have to know the reality. Some people even live below this minimum subsistence level. They earn much less than this, and yet they learn to survive. According to the government reports in 1993 and 94, there were 45.3% people of India who lived below the poverty line. By 2009 and 10, there were about 29.8% people who lived below poverty line. According to the latest report of 2011 and 12, we still have 21.9% people who live below the poverty line. Now we should take into consideration other factors while measuring poverty level apart from income and consumption. Social scientists now use other factors to analyze poverty. They analyze poverty based on social exclusion and vulnerability. The other factor is social exclusion. Now what is social exclusion? It is like we have divided people on the basis of rich and poor category. Rich people live in different localities and poor people live in different areas. Like in this picture you can see the high-rise building meant for the rich and the slums are meant for the poor. Now social exclusion has a very negative effect. The facilities that the rich enjoy, like the medical facilities, the schools, the hospitals, whereas the poor are unable to avail these facilities. The poor are even deprived of safe drinking water due to social exclusion. Now, social exclusion is both a cause as well as a consequence of poverty. Now, let me explain this line to you by giving you an example. Now, for example, in an area where rich people live and a poor person makes his jhuggi there, do you think the rich people will allow him to stay there? No. He will be forced to move out. He will be forced to stay in a place where the poor people live. Okay, if he lived with the rich, maybe he would have got more opportunities and would have improved
his living conditions. But he is forced to move out and live with the poor surroundings where he has no means to improve his income, and his situation remains the same. Okay, so you will see also in the villages, due to the caste system, you have seen the Brahmins, how they treat the Shudras. They are not allowed to live in the areas where the Brahmins live and are made to stay at the outskirts of the village. So you see, the poor, both social exclusion is both a cause, okay, as well as the result of poverty. Consequence means result. A poor person may be forced to live in poor surroundings because he is poor, and also a person may be poor because he stays in poor surroundings where he has no means to improve his income and situation. And people you can see living in these slums are excluded from facilities and benefits like clean surroundings, clean drinking water, and they don't get equal opportunities like the rich. So you can see this caption which shows, I am poor, so I have to live here. He has to live in the slum. I am poor because since he is poor, he has to live in these slum areas. Okay. Another example of analysis of poverty is vulnerability. Now let us understand the meaning of vulnerability. It means a person who is at a higher risk. Okay. Now let me explain this to you by giving you an example. Now take for example, there are 4 persons A, B, C and D. Okay. Now A has taken a single dose for the COVID vaccination, B has taken both the doses of vaccination, C has taken a double dose plus a booster vaccination, and D has not been vaccinated for COVID. So who will be more vulnerable? Who will be at a greater risk of getting COVID symptoms? So obviously the one who has not been vaccinated, he will be at a higher risk. Okay, so he is more vulnerable to get the symptoms of COVID, or maybe he may be catching those symptoms and has to be maybe hospitalized or need to be quarantined than the others. Why the others will be less affected? Because they have already been vaccinated. Okay. Now let us understand vulnerability or poverty. Now who have more chances of remaining poor or becoming poor? Who are the ones? So in the sense of vulnerability, we look at poverty as to see who are the persons who will remain poor or become poor. Here I give you another example. Now suppose there are 2 persons A and B. A works in a multinational company and B is a rickshaw puller. Now there is total lockdown in the country. Now who will be able to survive in a lockdown? Obviously the one who works in a multinational company. He has his savings and maybe the company is also giving him his salary, monthly salary, which maybe it may be half the salary, but at least he is able to manage himself during the lockdown. But what happens to B, who is a rickshaw puller, who lives on daily wages? Okay, he works hard every day and earns money, and on that daily money that he earns, he survives. Now during a lockdown, nobody will use the rickshaw, so how is he going to survive? So who is more vulnerable to poverty? Obviously B. He cannot survive in those bad times. So children, you see, vulnerability is determined by the ability of people to handle bad times, not only lockdown but also natural disasters like earthquakes, floods, tsunamis. So people who are already poor and do not have the means to cope with such bad times are more vulnerable. They have more chances of becoming poor or remaining poor in times to come. Okay. Now, who are those people who will remain vulnerable to poverty? Those who lack education, who don't have proper health care, they remain sick and poor and they don't get facilities to really take care of their health, their malnutrition. So how can they remain sick? They cannot go to work. And they also, since they are not educated, they don't get job opportunities. So these are the three main factors which leads people and become vulnerable to poverty. They either remain poor or become poor. Now, which are the vulnerable groups in our country who are vulnerable to poverty? Now, we can divide them into two groups: social groups and economic groups. Now, what is the meaning of social groups? As you know, our society is divided into varnas, right, from Brahmins to Shudras. So, the most vulnerable group who are more vulnerable to poverty, who have more chances and risk of remaining poor or becoming poor, are scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, economic groups depends on the level of income. Okay, it can be high income or low income, and the people who are more vulnerable in the economic group are in the urban areas, especially are the casual laborers, and in the rural areas they are landless farm laborers. Okay, so which are the two vulnerable groups? In the social groups we have the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, and in the economic groups, in the urban areas we have casual laborers, and in the rural areas we have landless farm laborers. Now graph 3.1, which is there in your textbook, shows the percentage of poor people in these two groups, which are the more vulnerable groups, the social groups and the economic groups. Okay, and here this graph clearly shows the average people who are below poverty line for all the groups in India is 22%. You can see 22. And if we look at the scheduled tribes, out of 100, 43 are not able to meet their basic needs. They are the most vulnerable groups. If you see the scheduled caste, out of 100, 29 are not able to meet their basic needs. Okay, and if we look at the economic categories, that is in the rural areas, the casual labor farmers who are landless farmers, they are 34%. Even in the urban areas, the casual labor is 34%. These are the most vulnerable groups. Now we had discussed about the most vulnerable group, the social groups, the scheduled tribes and the scheduled caste, and the economic categories, the casual labor, farm laborers in the rural areas who are landless farm laborers, and in the urban areas who are casual laborers. Now there is a double disadvantage for the casual laborers in the rural areas, especially if he is a scheduled caste. Yes, if he is a scheduled caste, he is at a double disadvantage. People don't want to employ him because of his social status. They are considered below the Varna system, so he will make it very difficult for him to really earn money. So they are more vulnerable to poverty if he belongs to any of these castes, either scheduled caste or scheduled tribes. Similarly, with the urban areas, if he belongs to scheduled caste or scheduled tribes, obviously people don't employ them due to social strata that we have, and it becomes more difficult for him to survive. So there is a double disadvantage for these two economic groups if they belong to the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe. Apart from these social groups, there is also inequality of income within a family. In poor families, all suffer, but some suffer more than others. In some cases, the women, the elderly, the female infants are denied equal access to resources available to the family. So this group is the poorest of the poor. Let us understand this better by studying the case study, the story of Shiva Raman. Let us understand this concept better through a case study, the story of Shiva Raman. Now Shiva Raman lives in a small village near Karur town in Tamil Nadu. He is a cobbler by caste, and now he works as an agricultural labor, working for rupees 50 per day only for 5 to 6 months in a year. Why 5 to 6 months in a year? It depends on the sowing and harvesting season. Now at other times he does odd jobs in the town. This is because the fact that Shiva Raman belongs to a lower caste and therefore uneducated, he cannot find a better paying job for himself. His wife Shashikala too works with him, but she can rarely find work these days. And even if she does, she is paid rupees 25 per day for the same work that Sivaraman does. So here we see gender discrimination in our society. Okay, it makes a difference in the wages paid to men and women for the same job. Now let's look into further. There are about 8 members in his family. We see Sivaraman, 65-year-old widowed mother who is ill and needs to be helped with her daily chores. Okay, and then he has a 25-year-old unmarried sister and 4 children aged between 1 to 16 years. So a big family size is also one of the causes of poverty here. 3 of them are girls and the youngest is the son. None of the girls go to school. Buying books and other things for the school-going girls is a luxury he cannot afford. And also he has to get them married at some point of a time. So he doesn't want to spend on the education now. The priority for Sivaraman here is to get the girls married and not to educate them. His sister and elder daughter take care of the household, and owing to the stereotype, men do not do any household work. Okay, and so Sivaraman now plans to send his son to school when he comes of age. Although the family has difficulty in arranging 2 meals a day, somehow Sivaraman manages to buy milk once in a while, but only for his son. So again we see here gender discrimination. Sivaraman only intends to buy milk for his son and send his son to school someday. Okay. Moving ahead to the next topic, interstate disparities. In this we are going to study about the state-wise poverty level in India. Before this we need to know what is head count ratio. Now head count ratio is the proportion of a population that exists or lives below the poverty line. That means how many people of the population live below the poverty line. According to 2011-12, the percentage was 21.9. There are some states in our country in which poverty level is more than the all India head count ratio, which was 21.9 in 2011 and 12. Let us see which are these states. So these states are, you can see here on the map, they are Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha and Assam. On the brighter side, there are some states in which poverty level is less than the all India head count ratio. Let us see which states are these. So you can see these states are starting from below. We can see Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Maharashtra, Gujarat and West Bengal. Now this graph 3.2, which is there in your textbook, clearly shows that Bihar and Odisha continue to be the poorest state with the poverty ratio at 33.7 and 32.6%. Okay, and then we can see states like Haryana and Punjab. They have done extremely well with the help of agricultural growth rate. And then we can see also Kerala focused on human resource development, and West Bengal you can see has also improved because of the land reform measures that they have taken. West Bengal has also improved. Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu have also improved due to proper distribution of food grains. So all this was about India. Now what about the poverty in the world? Yes, the World Bank measures poverty at the world level. According to the World Bank reports, in 1990, 36% lived below poverty line, and by 2015 we see 10% lived below poverty line. So there has been a drastic reduction in the level of poverty in various parts of the world. In sub-Sahara Africa, between 2005 and 2015, there has been a 10% decline in the poverty level. You can see in 2005 it was 51%, and by 2015 it was 41%. So we see a decline of 10%. So in Latin America, also during the same time, there has been a decline of 6% in the poverty level. You can see in 2005 it was 10%, and by 2015 it is only 4% who are below poverty line. So there is a reduction of 6%. But most importantly, let us look at China. We can see there has been a drastic reduction and there's decline in the poverty level. Just see, by 1981 it was 88.3%. By 2008 it reduced further to 14.7%, and 2015 it is only 0.7%. Wow, that's something remarkably they have achieved, and we must learn something from them. Well, now let us look into the causes of poverty. One of the historical reasons for the low level of economic development was under the British colonial administration. The policies of this colonial government ruined the traditional handicraft and discouraged development of industries like textiles. Now, due to the British policies, we can see this led to less job opportunities, and then because of less job opportunities, people earned less, so there was low growth rate of income. But then we see our population started growing rapidly, which led to less availability of jobs, leading to unemployment and further leading to poverty, where people had very low per capita income. The second cause for poverty was not enough jobs to employ all job seekers. Now, with the spread of irrigation and green revolution, many job opportunities were created in the agricultural sector, but the effects were limited only to certain parts of India. They were limited to only few areas in India. Now, the green revolution benefited only those farmers who were rich. But what happened to these landless farmers? Yes, it did not benefit them. They did not have the land for them. So they moved to the cities. In the cities, they did not get proper job opportunities. So they worked as, you can see in the picture, as rickshaw pullers, as vegetable vendors, or worked in the construction site, or even worked as domestic servants. Now, with irregular income, these people could not afford expensive housing, so they started living in slums in the outskirts of the cities. The third reason for poverty is huge income equality. Now, here we see in India that the rich are becoming richer and the poor are becoming poorer. So there is an inequality, okay? And the reason behind this could be failure of land reforms and lack of land resources. Like the landless laborers don't have any land, they are unable to cultivate their land due to poverty. So because of this huge income inequality in our country, it is also one of the causes for poverty. The fourth reason is socio-cultural and economic factors. Now, in India, to fulfill social obligations and to observe religious ceremonies, especially like a wedding, whether he is poor or rich, he needs to spend a lot of money by giving dowry. And even small farmers who have hardly any income, they have to buy agricultural inputs like seeds, fertilizers and pesticides so that they can grow crops in their fields. and since they are poor they cannot buy it, so they have to borrow money, and then they are unable to repay the money, so they live in a cycle of debt all the time, and this is called the cycle of poverty. Now moving ahead, a removal of poverty has been one of the major objectives of the Indian government. And so now let us look into the strategies that the government has taken for anti-poverty measures. First one is promotion of economic growth. Now how does economic growth lead to reduction of poverty? Let us see that. Now let us understand this. Whenever there is economic growth, which means the companies will earn profit, and once the companies will earn profit, more job opportunities will be created, and once job opportunities are created, they will start investing in human resources. Now they will look, even people will send their children to school, they will look after their health, so it will lead to education and health, and once this is achieved, it will result in the reduction of poverty. So poverty will be reduced due to economic growth. However, the poor may not be able to take direct advantage from the opportunities by economic growth. So in these circumstances, there is a need for targeted anti-poverty measures which the government is taking up. And one of them was the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005. Now, according to this act, it aimed to provide 100 days of wage employment to every household to ensure livelihood security in rural areas. And according to this Manrega Act, 1/3 of the proposed jobs have been reserved for women. Now this Manrega Act of 2005 also aimed at sustainable development to address the cause of drought, deforestation and soil erosion. So you can see how they are going to cope up with drought situation, and there's dry and no rainfall, deforestation, cutting of trees and soil erosion. Another anti-poverty scheme that was started in 1993, the Prime Minister ROZGAR YOZANA, and according to this, it aimed to create self-employment opportunities for rural, educated, unemployed. They could start a small business or set up their industries in rural areas and in small towns. In 1995, Rural Employment Generation Program was launched. This program aimed to create self-employment opportunities in rural areas and in small towns. In 1999, Swar Jayanti Gram Rozgar Yojana was launched, and this program aims at bringing the assisted poor families above the poverty line. Now this Yojana assisted the poor families to bring them above the poverty line by organizing them into self-help groups. Okay, self-help groups through a mixture of bank credits and government subsidy. So they would be given subsidy and bank credits to develop something on their own. In 2000, the Pradhan Mantri Gramodaya Yojana was launched. Under this program, additional central assistance is given to state for several basic services such as primary health, primary education, rural shelter, rural drinking water and rural electrification. Another scheme that was launched was Antayodaya and Anna Yojana, and under this scheme the poorest of the poor were identified and 25 kgs of food grains were made available at a highly subsidized rate of rupees 2 per kg for wheat and rupees 3 for rice. Now let us see what are the challenges ahead. Although we have no doubt we have reduced the poverty level of our country, but in spite of making so much of progress in our country, poverty still remains India's most compelling challenge. we still have to work on reducing the poverty level in spite of the economic growth that we have done. Now, what are the challenges that we see? Yes, we see disparity in poverty is visible between rural and urban areas. You see the rural areas, people have to really work hard to earn a living, whereas in urban areas, they get proper jobs, they may be earning still better. So there is a difference in the earning income between the rural and urban areas. And also we see the disparity of poverty in different states. Some states are doing very well, and other states still are below the poverty line. People are below the poverty line, so they have to work. So these are the challenges. And certain social groups, especially the scheduled tribes and the scheduled caste, are vulnerable to poverty. So we have to do something about this. These are the two main challenges to eradicate poverty from our country. Now, how do we overcome these challenges? It is possible only when there is higher economic growth and there is increasingly stress on universal free elementary education. Now, everyone, at least basic education, everyone should get. Elementary education, everyone should get, and that also free, so that people are educated. And the third factor is declining of population growth. Okay, the population should reduce so that more people can get opportunities. And we must now also increase empowerment of women. We must make our women more empowered. That means they should be given jobs, especially for women and weaker section who are more vulnerable to poverty. So something has to be done for them. So these are the main things by which we can overcome our poverty challenges. Mahatma Gandhi devoted his life to the poor, India's poor. He said that poverty is the worst form of violence. He insisted that true independence for India will come only when its poorest people become free of suffering. So children, with this we conclude the chapter. I hope you have understood it well. Please do write in the comment section if you need further assistance. Till then, do view and subscribe. Thank you, and wait for my next video.